I get it that that we need to keep the lights on. We need to make sure people have affordable electricity, etc. Net zero actually will deliver us a sustainable, secure energy independence at an affordable price in the future. And I think it's a bit like we have to, fix the roof a little bit when it's raining, but also plan for the future as well. So the commitments that the government have made with the commitment to having net zero by 2035, I think that will also help us in the future to make sure that we've got affordable energy. For example, if we didn't have the gas price now, the offshore wind business is delivering competitive electricity prices. So this is in effect future-proofing the energy system so that we are not reliant on this global market in the future so much.
Tell us about the progress we've made. Not so long ago, 40% of our electricity was generated using coal. Now it's almost none. Renewables are a major part of our energy mix. Gas, though, is still 35 to 40%. To what extent are renewables already helping us?
Renewables are helping us significantly. I mean, if you look, we've got, 12, 14 gigawatts of renewables in the sea at the moment. What
does that mean to my mum?
To your mum, it means we've got lots of offshore wind farms that are out in the sea. She probably can't see them, being connected up to the national grid.
But there are days when renewables are 20, 30, even 40% of our energy mix, right?
They are indeed. And you'll hear things talked about like hydrogen, and you'll hear things talked about energy storage. So when you have wind, we have days when there's lots of wind, but we don't have the demand for energy. That's when we need to start thinking about energy storage. And some of the things that we want to talk about is to get the industry to start talking about policies around energy storage, long duration energy storage. So when the sun don't shine, when the wind ain't blowing, you've actually captured wind energy when you didn't need it, and then you can use that stored energy to provide cheap electricity to homes and businesses across the country. Please keep your focus on the net zero agenda, because it's those things that you have to do. Give you another little stat on if you talk about wind turbines, right? So we have to quadruple the number of wind turbines that we have to put in the sea compared to what we've done to date, and we've got half the time to do it.
Before the government's target?
Before the government's target of hitting 50 gigawatts by 2030. And if you look at what does that mean, if you think 25% of the global manufacturing capacity will be needed to deliver that for the UK alone, right? So they're big numbers.
Now, you're proudly from the Northeast. I've been up to the Northeast a lot pursuing this sort of energy story. I know Siemens Energy UK is involved in the big carbon capture project up there on Teesside. I know you've got a wind turbine manufacturing facility. I think it's in Hull.
Correct, yeah.
How big could offshore wind be for the UK? Somebody called Boris Johnson, I can't remember who he is myself, but he once said that we could be the Saudi Arabia of wind, referring to obviously the desert kingdom that has dominated global oil production in recent generations. Is he right?
I think he is right. We've got some unique geology in the UK. We've got best winds anywhere. So wind turbines make sense offshore. They're getting further offshore. We talk about things like floating wind as well. And then we also have geology like empty
floating wind, where the sea's too deep to bolt to, or
so
economically bolt to.
Absolutely, that sort of thing. We also have gas fields which are empty, so we can actually store carbon that's produced from industries and from power generation. We can store carbon. That's the project you're talking about on Teesside. There's another one.
Locking it underground.
Locking it underground, storing it for hundreds of years. And these are all things that actually take you to that net zero position. So if we can have, think ahead to 2030, if we deliver this, and the key is, can we deliver it? And the point I want to make is about capacity in the supply chain. There's things that we have to unlock and then grow the capacity, which will deliver low cost, sustainable energy for the future. And if that happens, then we've delivered our net zero by 2035. Yeah?
Steve, some GBNews viewers and listeners will be screaming at their televisions and radios saying, yes, but what about when the wind doesn't blow? That's the problem with renewables. You can't store renewable energy. Or can you? Tell us how you can restore renewable energy with specific reference to hydrogen.
So I think, well, if you look at hydrogen, so I'm lucky enough, privileged enough that I sit on the government's hydrogen advisory council, and I think you know I want to say you know a bit of good news. BEIS, they've done
that's the business
energy and industrial strategy department.
The Whitehall department.
They've done a tremendous job. They've had the vision under the leadership of Kwasi Kwarteng to actually come up with a hydrogen strategy. They've got hydrogen business models. They've got the hydrogen standard. They've got the net zero hydrogen fund, and this is like a nascent new technology that they're trying to bring to the UK. So they've had the vision to do that. They've made some commitments of what they're going to try and do, trying to get to 10 gigawatts of hydrogen by 2030, which is, it sounds enormous. It's 10,000 times what we have today to get to that point. And that will allow us to, so when the wind's blowing, like I said before, when the wind's blowing, we can produce green hydrogen. How do you produce green hydrogen? You take water and you split it into hydrogen and oxygen, and you store the hydrogen. And then you can use that hydrogen for lots of different applications. So that's where you store energy. Principle being in all of this, store energy when you don't need it and use it when you do need it. So that's the whole principle of it.
Allow me, Steve, this is what you do. Just allow me to lay out the steps, if I will, and we can take the viewers and listeners with us. So what we're saying here is that the wind turbines blow, they generate power, electricity. When that electricity isn't immediately demanded by the grid, you can use that electricity to conduct electrolysis, which creates the hydrogen. The hydrogen can then be stored and used as energy. The hydrogen can be converted into all kinds of other energy sources that can fuel everything from turbines to cars to heavy machinery, right?
That's absolutely right. Liam, I think you're wasted in the job you're doing. You've absolutely got it. You've nailed it. That's
some people say the same thing.
That's absolutely right. It's those types of things.
And it's important that from your perspective, from an environmental perspective, that we use so-called green hydrogen, hydrogen produced where the electricity comes from renewable energy.
Yeah.
As opposed, well, you got yellow hydrogen, haven't you, when you use atomic energy to do the electrolysis to create the hydrogen. You've also got so-called, is it blue hydrogen? Yeah. Explain the different colours of the rainbow.
Well, you have multiple colours of hydrogen, and for this argument, if you like, I don't think it really matters. The best way I would describe
it does matter, doesn't it? If we use oil and gas to do the electrolysis to create the hydrogen, so what do you call that? Brown hydrogen.
So blue hydrogen. Let's go blue hydrogen. Blue hydrogen is using a reformation process with methane, natural gas that we all use in our homes, and then you split it and you capture the carbon, right? So you reform it and you capture the carbon and you store the carbon under the North Sea. That's basically what you do. I use the analogy, it's like a twin track approach, if we call it green and blue. It's like getting from London up to Scotland. One used the east coast and the other one used the west coast. It's two totally different journeys, but you end up in the same place, yeah? And it's that sort of thing. So we will end up with probably 4 or 5 big blue hydrogen plants, which are, call it like...
So to be clear, this is hydrogen produced using fossil fuels,
correct,
but you capture the carbon
and store it.
To store it.
Correct. And if you think of those at blue hydrogen plant, just visualization, it's like a petrochemical plant, big plant. Where if you talk about electrolysis, it's a unit, a smaller unit. We make them 17.5 megawatts, relatively small, but you'll need thousands of them, or more than thousands of them. That's the sort of the scale of the difference between the two.
Now, you are, as you sound, the government's hydrogen task force. I know you've been doing a lot of advocacy behind the scenes, and you are making progress. But I put it to you, Steve, and I've spoken with many other sort of industrialists and business leaders about this. I put it to you that our hydrogen strategy is still way behind where it should be. We're still not taking hydrogen seriously enough. For instance, we could use hydrogen to drive our buses and cars and lorries and all the rest of it. And yet the government is going headlong, the country is going headlong down an electric vehicle route that uses battery technology, completely separate from hydrogen technology, where we are carting around very, very heavy batteries in our vehicles. This is the vision. Those batteries dependent on substances like lithium, so-called rare earths that are mined predominantly in countries that don't really like us very much, like the Central African Republic or China. Isn't the whole electric vehicle thing a blind alley?
I don't think so. I think your first question was about where are the government with the hydrogen in terms of the if you want to say on the global stage. I think we were leading, and I think we have to keep up the pace to continue to have that leading position. So things like energy, transportation and storage. Some of the things that you've mentioned, if you look in Aberdeen, you know, there's hydrogen fueled buses at the moment.
Yeah.
But
you've got in Northern Ireland, the Wright Bus Company is generating a whole new fleet of hydrogen powered buses.
Yeah, with Rise Hydrogen. Yeah, that's exactly.
So why do we need these EVs? Why do we need all these rare earths? Why are we rolling out an EV charging network across the country where we should be rolling out a hydrogen network?
I think, Liam, you need all of these levers to achieve what we're trying to achieve is net zero. So I think you need all of the measures. You can't pick a winner, one direction or the other. The energy transition, as I like to say to people, it's a general direction. It's not a clear road that it's point A to point B. It's going to be a navigational road. There'll be new technologies which will come along as we evolve and technologies advance. And that's why I think you have to keep all the options open. So I think it's right to
make a decision. I mean, we want to keep all the options open, but we're talking serious money to roll out an electric vehicle charging network that may well be obsolete. That may well be works. Everything that I've seen convinces me as an observer, an interested and attentive observer, but I'm not a scientist, but it strikes me it's by far the superior technology.
But if you look at the moment, I mean, green hydrogen is very expensive at the moment. You know that, it's very expensive. But I think if you think of...
Because the scale's so small.
So small at the moment. But if you think of what's been delivered through offshore wind, it started very expensive and the cost point has come down. What I would advocate for is to say that if you look at all of these industries I've talked about, offshore wind, carbon capture and storage, hydrogen, all those things, as you scale up, the cost will come down. And that's where you get back to my point about energy security, affordability, etc. So I think that's where you come. My option, I'm an electric car driver. I'm privileged to be an electric car driver. I think you have to have optionality. You've got hybrids, you've got fuel cars, you've got electric cars, and you've got this new industry that's developing, which is hydrogen. If you look at a hydrogen roadmap and just see where it comes from, if you start to draw the roadmap, you start to say you're actually going to start with things like cars, maybe cars, transport, buses, producing hydrogen local to where it's going to be used. And that's what's happening in Aberdeen. If you then start to go a bit further and say you can have a blue hydrogen plant, you might have one here, one there, one further on. And so you're just going to see that scaling up. And I think, use the analogy of the offshore wind business, it starts very small. You know, original contracts were smaller machines. Now they're getting bigger machines, more efficient machines. They're getting further offshore. But I think another point I wouldn't mind making to you, Liam, is that if you look at all of this offshore wind, you know, the wind turbines and the towers are all the things that people focus upon. Every one of these wind turbines has to be connected to the national grid, every single one of them. And in our report that we issued the other day, which was called the National Endeavour, we talked about that if you talk about what we need to do by 2035, you need to increase the transmission network, the local transmission network, by 50%. In all
That's
of the,
a lot of copper.
It's a lot of copper.
Copper's really expensive.
Yeah. And this is why I think that's one of the asks of government. And this isn't just an ask of government, it's an ask of the whole of the industry to come together back to this national endeavour. What I would ask of government is give us some clarity on what you want by when, which is why I keep saying come back to the 2035. We use the idea, if you went down a dark alley with your iPhone, with your light on, you can only see what you can see. If you floodlight that alley, you get a vision of the future, you can see where you can turn off, and that allows us as suppliers and the supply chain to plan things. So when you talk about rare metals and copper and things like that, you can get in these global supply chains. There's no doubt about it, you're absolutely right. Global supply chains.
I mean, copper prices are going to go to the moon, aren't they? I mean,
and
so much of renewable, you know, the offshore wind industry, you use so much copper in your production. An electric vehicle uses 5 times more copper than a conventional vehicle.
But if you get into the position where you can have visibility and you can plan, and this is all about, again, back to this national endeavour, we can create, I believe, as a country, this, I would call it like an industrial backbone. All of this work I've talked about, carbon capture and storage, hydrogen, offshore wind, transmission networks, etc. These are great. I started as an apprentice, a 16-year-old, right?
Good lad.
I started as an apprentice, 16-year-old, a few years ago now. And when you look at, I've seen energy transition topics happening. These jobs that I'm talking about are lifetime career jobs. These are not just project jobs. These are things that people will be employed for a lifetime.
And I do know there's a huge amount of enthusiasm up on Teesside for the renewable industry. You're converting, you know, marine bays that used to be used for shipbuilding, then they were converted to North Sea offshore rig construction and so on. Now they're being converted again to renewable. The Geordies, ever adaptable. But look, it's great to have you with me, Steve. And while you're here, I want to really try and learn something from you, because I don't understand why it is that even though renewable production has gone up, even though unit cost of renewable, albeit with subsidy, has fallen significantly, why is it then that the gas price still completely dominates the energy market? How does that work? Why aren't ordinary people benefiting from the reduction of costs of renewables? Because if they did benefit from renewables, even people whose bills, they've gone with companies where it's entirely renewable, their bills are just the same as their neighbours who went with the gas-fired company. But how can we decouple energy prices from the gas price?
Well, I think that's where we have to get to. If you look at the but just for the benefit of the viewers, you look at what's happening at the moment. It's a perfect storm, isn't it? You've got the interconnector that we have to France that normally they produce cheap nuclear power and then we import it, but they've got problems with the reactors, so we're currently exporting. You've got Norway where their
hydropower's down, so they might not send us so much gas through the Langland undersea pipeline.
We've got interconnectors that we've built with many countries, so people are now sort of, because of the crisis, because of the invasion of Ukraine, with a gas price problem, everybody's vying to try and buy gas on the international market. We're competing against Europe, we're competing against the world, if you like. That's what's driving the gas price. So we have to decouple that. And some of the things I've been talking about, if we can, have a short-term addressing the issue that we talked about, the energy crisis, which hopefully that's sorted. I know it's a longer-term thing, but if we can then focus on some of the issues of the long-term thing, I think you're going to build in future-proofing to reduce the reliance on gas and reduce the price.
How do we? Where is the lever that we pull? What is the legislation that we write? Let's say you and I have got in a room and said, right, we are going to decouple the wholesale energy price from gas prices to reflect the fact that a lot of this energy now isn't gas, it's renewable provided, it's other sources. How do you do that decoupling? Is it a cultural thing? Is it an institutional thing? Is it a legislation thing?
I think you can see we're going to wean ourselves off gas eventually. That's where we're heading towards net zero by 2050, right? And another little stat just to put in viewers' minds. When we talk about net zero by 2050, that means that everything that we have today, trains, buses, planes, lorries, energy production, etc., we've got to capture carbon, we've got to store carbon, we've got to make hydrogen, and we've got less than 1 billion seconds to do that between now and 2050.
Let me put it really bluntly, right, in the last few minutes of this interview. Sure. Why is it that renewable companies who are producing energy cheaply now, after massive subsidies that are ongoing, are able to sell their energy at massively elevated prices that reflect the price of gas? Why is that? I don't understand why. I really want to.
Because I think we have an energy system which is a mix at the moment, isn't it? So I think if we can wean ourselves off gas and more onto renewables and those types of things, then I think you do create that difference that you have between gas and renewable energy.
To me, as a highly trained economist, with all respect, Steve, the market looks rigged. As a punter paying massive energy bills and lots of tax, I don't understand why the market doesn't operate properly. It strikes me there's some kind of institutional inertia in the market that the massive amount of renewable energy that's now coming through, that's relatively cheap compared to gas, is not influencing the spot price at which we buy our wholesale energy.
I think if you look in the mix of we've got what, 12 gigawatts of wind, I don't know, 8, 10 that's running at the moment. But if you look at what the sort of size of our demand is, it's still dominated by gas, and that's until you can see that reducing. We've got 29 million gas boilers in this country. We need to think about how do we transition away that. And I think the more we can reduce our reliance on gas, then I think you'll see that separation.
Well, I certainly hope so. Steve Scrimshaw, it's been really interesting and useful to talk to you. You are from Siemens UK, and thanks a lot for appearing.
Thanks very much.
On Money Talks.
Cheers.